Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Worldviewtalk.com.
Good morning. Welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is Wednesday, June 25th, 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report, as well as across all of the fine programming you see throughout the day on Worldview Tube and, of course, Worldview Radio. As you know, we've been broadcasting in this space since 2006, and it's our goal, our mission, our ministry to bring to the great marketplace of ideas a Christian perspective on all of the views and news of the day. We have economic news, political news, financial news, all sorts of information comes throughout the day, and we package that and we bring it to the great marketplace of ideas from a Christian perspective. And of course, that's our ministry, that's our mission, that's what we do. So we appreciate your support, not only as a viewer, where you watch our information, because there's so many choices in an ever-expanding digital marketplace of ideas. There isn't a day goes by that another podcast or some broadcaster shows up with a microphone and a camera. And that's an important thing because it makes for a robust marketplace. We think about a traditional marketplace where you go in and you want to buy vegetables or something. The more sellers and the more buyers, the more efficient those markets become, and everyone likes walking into a marketplace of abundance. Well, we have that abundance in spades with the information marketplace, and that's why it's so important that we continue to have a Christian message resonating free of charge within that market. As you know, we don't have a paywall and we don't have a subscription price. You watch our information free of charge. It's a gift freely given, just like back in the olden days when the apostles Peter and Paul were wandering around the Middle East sharing the gospel. They didn't charge admission, and neither do we. And that's why it's important what we do and why we do it is very important to keep a Christian perspective alive and fresh and important in that marketplace of ideas. Now, you may ask, how can I help in this ministry? Well, we have an opportunity for you to do that. You can go to worldviewfoundation.com and you can make a donation, and that will help us keep our ministry going and keep us offering content free of charge. It's worldviewfoundation.com. And you can go to that website, or sometimes on the screen, there's a QR code. You can scan that in, and it'll take you right to the website. And you can make a one-time donation, which is very appreciated, or you can sign up for repeat donations, which has the added benefit of flattening our revenue curve so we can better match our costs to our revenues and keep our bottom line positive and keep our information flowing. So that's one way you can help, is make a donation. Another way you can help is to watch our network, and when you see companies advertising on our network, you will want to do business with them, because we don't sell blocks of advertising time. We effectively partner with companies that we know and trust. So when you buy the goods and services they offer, a small portion of those revenues come back to the network in the form of a commission, and that helps subsidize our operations as well. On the bottom of the screen here, I see www.foundation.com, or you can use the QR code right now and it takes you right to the website, or you can do business with the people that are advertising on our network throughout the day, knowing that every time you make a purchase of their quality goods and services, you're helping the network as well. There's a third way that you can help, and this is kind of a new thing that's kind of important. If you go to worldviewtube.com/vault, it takes you to our new product called The Vault. And within that vault is an amazing collection of all of Brandon Howe's ministry works, his books, a lot of his recorded seminars and conferences. We have interviews with Christian thought leaders throughout the period of decades. And of course, we have the Eastman Financial Report reruns in the vault. So if you really are interested in the content of our ministry, it's all available, and it's all available in the vault. And of course, there's a little subscription fee involved, and that money goes to help keep the network going. So those are the three ways to help us continue this ministry. Number one, make the donation. Number two, do business with the people you see advertising throughout the day on our network. And number three, consider signing up for the Vault. It's because it's great content, great information. And again, you're helping us keep this information alive from a Christian worldview, a Christian perspective in that great marketplace of ideas. So with that, I want to jump into the news today. And there's some very interesting news. Of course, we're in the middle of the week here, in the middle of the summer, and things do tend to cool off a little bit from an economic perspective. America has always been a traditional feeling within American culture that summertime is a time when people kick back and relax a little bit. It's an old saying on Wall Street, sell in May and go away, lock in your gains through the end of the year, and you can enjoy your summer without worrying about losing your money or your portfolio. The point is, summertime sort of cools down a little bit from economic news, and that gives us a chance to reflect a little bit more about maybe the economic theories and the financial theories in place, and to explore those theories rather than reporting on the news of the moment. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is I've been talking about the Federal Reserve quite a bit. I'm going to continue talking about that, but I did want to break one little bit of news that I thought is interesting, and that is a news story in the media in this day, talking about the Shell Oil Company is seeking to acquire the British Petroleum Oil Company. And for people a bit more experienced, such as myself, who've been around remarkably, it's a fascinating story because back in the day, after World War II, the British and the Americans figured out that in order to prosecute a war, meaning the war in Europe during World War II, it took vast amounts of oil and gasoline and diesel fuel in order to move all the tanks and trucks and people around. You had to move all the armies around. And it became very clear that if you were to have access to or control the supply of oil, that would be a good thing for your national sovereignty. So, of course, the British, still being somewhat very much involved in the British Empire in the very waning days, and the Americans really looked at the Middle East as a very important source of energy and oil. Of course, that's why the Germans were down there as well. They wanted to try and secure the oil energy supplies and resources. And that, of course, was a whole theater of war for people who follow World War II. But the point is, after the war, the United States and Great Britain really were able to capture a large part of the Saudi Peninsula and all these little sheikdoms and all of these places because they had an amazing amount of oil that was relatively easy to bring to the surface and then ship off to the refiners. And then gasoline became a thing and diesel fuel became a thing. And of course, that is what really birthed the modern automobile markets in not only Britain and Reconstruction Europe, but also very much in the United States. Now, we had oil, of course, in Texas, and we all know about the old Texas oil booms. But the idea of being able to secure global oil resources was a real thing. And of course, the British and the Americans very cleverly negotiated with the Saudis and other governments to effectively control all of the oil, which the Saudis and others figured out after a while wasn't the best interest. But the point is, with the emergence of the oil industry after World War II, there became a thing, and it's a really great book. I've got it on my bookshelf here somewhere. I see it over there. The Seven Sisters. It's an interesting read. It's archaic at this point. If you're reading this book for the first time in 2025, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It will be very dated. But the premise of the book was that there were seven very powerful oil companies that dominated global oil at the time after World War II. And of course, two of those seven sisters, now there's been a lot of mergers. I think they're only down to four now. And so three of the sisters merged. But the point is, Shell Oil Company was controlled very much by the Dutch. It was British influences within the Dutch nation, and Shell Oil was a Dutch concern. And of course, British Petroleum, BP, British Petroleum, was the British side of it. And of course, America had Mobil and Exxon and all the other companies. But the point is, these two legacy sisters are now looking to merge into a company that would be an $80 billion deal. Now, we've been looking at the merger and acquisition market since the 1980s. The great book, Barbarians at the Gates, the idea in the 1980s that capital could be restructured and made more efficient by breaking the traditional corporate mold and recombining assets. And that was basically what happened in the 1980s with all the big merger and acquisition frenzy. And this is a continuation of that decades later. But it's an important story because what you're seeing is the continued consolidation of the world energy supplies. And it is concentrating into fewer and fewer hands over decades. But the idea that Shell Oil and British Petroleum would combine, and mind you, these are not U.S. companies that are subject to U.S. antitrust provisions. They can go ahead and do whatever they want because they're offshore. But the point is, this is another indicator of the consolidation and the concentration of capital for the production and transportation and refining and distribution of oil and gasoline and diesel fuel. So it's an interesting thing to watch. And it's also an interesting thing to watch at this point in history because we still have the electric car phenomenon. I think of all the times in automotive history, which is a relatively short span of time, there were electric cars back in the beginning. And of course, there's been a dream since the 1970s of electric vehicles. And now with the push with Tesla and all the big manufacturers coming out with their version of electric cars, never have electric cars penetrated the mass market like they have today. And what it suggests is that as we look into the future, that electric propulsion vehicles may fizzle out because they have a very poor range, or they may become the dominant version of personal transportation, basically because of their clean operating. You don't need to have oil from the Middle East and shipped over, refined, pumped into your car, burning up all this stuff. You just basically plug your car in, charge it up, and zip, off you go. And of course, the whole electric vehicle phenomenon is really hinging on one technological glitch, and that is range. You plug your car in, you charge it all up, and then you're going to drive somewhere and you run out of juice. You got to plug it in, wait an hour or two, whatever, if you can find a place to plug it in. If those technological glitches become solved by more meaningful power stations and more effective ways to charge batteries, then you could see a time when the automotive world starts to migrate toward electric vehicles. And the big manufacturers have put a lot of time and billions of dollars into electrical vehicle development. Of course, the marketplace, it's fine if you're buzzing around town, you can plug your car in at home at night, that's great. But when you want to go somewhere, and this is the idea of American freedom, nothing has defined individual freedom in America more than the ability to get into a motor vehicle and drive from New York to California. And every once in a while, you got to stop for 10 minutes and pump some gasoline, maybe go in, use the facilities, buy an ice cream cone, whatever, and off you go. Once those technological problems are solved, and they will be, it changes the paradigm. And then at that point, if we look at a global fleet of electric vehicles, then the Shell to BP merger maybe it isn't such a great big news after all. It could very well be a consolidation of capital, realizing that on the horizon there is a paradigm shift that will make the idea of pumping oil and refining it and shipping and burning and all this stuff obsolete. And of course, this has happened repeatedly throughout the technological history of mankind. We don't sail ships with wind sails. It was a beautiful thing to watch the tall ships. As a matter of fact, if you're anywhere in the Great Lakes, we'll be seeing a fleet of tall ships coming to Wisconsin, sailing up the coast of Wisconsin. It's a magnificent thing to see. The culture, the sounds or the lack of sound, the magnificence of tall sailing ships sailing, bringing goods from China to Boston and this and that. It's all gone. It's all gone. Now it's a nostalgic thing. A couple of hobbyists like to keep these things going. So circumstances shift. The same thing with horsepower. When we think about back in the olden days, which was probably from the beginning of mankind through about 1890s, people would hook an animal to a cart and, he'd tap the little thing along and the animal would pull the cart. That's where we get horsepower from. But that all went away. We have, sort of a nostalgic look at the buggy whip phenomenon. If you were the manufacturer of buggy whips, well, you went out of business because nobody had a horse and buggy. So these technological advances happen, and that's why when you look at this merger of Shell and BP, it's a huge deal. $80 billion. You have to ask the question, is that an economic efficiency, or is that sort of like preparing for the end game? And we don't know. We'll see. Technology will decide. Well, hey, let's take a break, and I will be back in a minute, and we'll continue our discussion. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
Okay, welcome back. Well, I was talking about the oil business, but I want to shift gears here a little bit. In May of this year, it's been reported that the third largest deficit in history was generated by the federal government, and that was $316 billion of spending deficit. That means they took in $316 billion less than they spent. And of course, that adds to the $2.0 to $2.5 trillion annual projected deficit, which of course ends up on the stack of the $37 trillion in national debt. Yesterday, I talked about how the United States, when you look at the amount of interest paid on the national debt, we are the fourth weakest country, I guess, in the world, because our percentage of tax revenue that goes to pay the interest on the debt is about 18%, and it's projected to become maybe about 25% within the next 10 years if we don't change the trajectory. So the problem is that we're still continuing to develop this national debt problem based upon deficit spending that Congress just simply can't get under control. And even now we're awaiting the fate of the one big beautiful bill, which is important. And it's important to the Trump administration because you need a budget bill or a platform upon which to operate. And this is the platform the president wants. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what happens. But keep in mind, there's still about $4 to $5 trillion in additional deficit that will be added, unless, of course, the big beautiful bill generates a lot of new tax revenue, and you can start to close that gap. And of course, that's what remains to be seen. The interesting thing is, with respect to all of the news about tariffs and the lack of any material input into inflation, we're also not seeing enough revenue to change the paradigm that much. Now, the goal, of course, if you read between the lines with the tariffs, is to create sort of a national sale or an international sales tax, where if you want to make things somewhere else and sell them here, you have to pay the federal government 10%. And that's kind of cool because imported goods, you pay 10% to the federal government, you can sell your stuff into the marketplace. And the same thing with the reciprocity, where if we make stuff here and we want to sell it over there, well, we have to pay a 10% tax as well. So everybody basically is competing on quality and quantity of goods, quality of goods. And if and only if such transactions occur, there's a 10% fee to the government, and that sort of subsidizes the tax base. And it sort of, at least in the United States, it augments our 165 million taxpayers who are coughing up about roughly $5 trillion a year. The tariff should add a little to the revenue so that it closes the deficit gap. Now, in a perfect world, you'd like to see that deficit gap just zero, and perhaps sometimes running a little surplus. Now, nobody likes to pay taxes into a government that is taxing more than they need and storing it up for a rainy day. As a matter of fact, states and local governments have that argument quite often. Should we have a rainy day fund? Well, you're taxing more than you need. That's not your money. versus when there is a need, it's nice to have a rainy day fund. But the point is, at the federal level, none of that exists. And it doesn't exist because, and only because, of the ability of the Federal Reserve System to effectively buy whatever bonds are necessary to keep the market interest rates in equilibrium, put them on their balance sheet, somewhere between $6 and $8 trillion currently, and of course, pump new money into the economy to buy the bonds. So without that mechanism in place, the federal government would hit the ceilings rather quickly because it would have a very, very disruptive effect on national debt markets and natural market governance within a free market would quickly slow down the ability of the federal government to borrow without political consequence because it effectively tanked the market. So we're watching that. And that's why it's an interesting comment. We heard Chairman Powell, of course, he's doing his Humphrey Hawkins show this February and July, it's twice a year, where the Federal Reserve Chair must appear before Congress and the House of Representatives as well as the Senate committees and explain what they're doing. And that comes back to the 1970s when unemployment and stagnant economy, stagflation was a big deal. Humphrey was Hubert H. Humphrey, senator from Minnesota, and Hawkins from the House. They put together a bill that said, look, we have to talk to the Fed twice a year and understand what the Fed is up to because it's really important because they're an independent agency or an independent organization that's running the American economy, but yet we, the politicians, are on the hook to the voters. The voters want action, and we got this independent banking group doing whatever they feel is necessary, but it's not in the best interests of the people. It's in the best interest of the banks. And that's why this was created in the 1970s. So, of course, he's testifying, and what he's talking about is that he doesn't see the federal debt of $37 trillion to be a big deal when he's factoring in whether or not to cut interest rates. And, that seems to be just a very difficult statement to come to grips with because nothing is driving the American economy more than $37 trillion in debt, where 18 to 20% of all tax dollars collected is going to pay interest on money they spent last year and decades ago. It's not helping people today. You're paying $1.2 trillion in taxpayer money to pay the interest on debt that you borrowed to help people in the past. And a lot of times the people aren't even in the United States. They're giving the money to the NGOs. The NGOs run around the world and do magical things with it. And none of that stuff has any benefit to the people. So now we're paying federal income taxes. And roughly 18% of every dollar you send to the Treasury is being used to pay interest on money that they already spent elsewhere in a different time period. And that's becoming a real problem. So if Chairman Powell doesn't see that or recognize that, that's sad because I think that creates the type of political tension that needs to be addressed in a modern society. Now, keep in mind, the Federal Reserve System was created in 1913. That was before automobiles. That was before electricity. That was before a lot of things, certainly before digital computers and modern science and modern culture. And it begs the question as to when the Federal Reserve System becomes an anachronism, because the rules and the methodology that was used in 1913 was not devised at a time when you had 127% of GDP as your national debt. It doesn't matter. And that's the problem, we have with a Federal Reserve System that has the ability to fiddle around with the interest rates to try and keep the debt markets straight. They do that through open market activities, not the open market committee meeting where they fiddle around with the interbank lending rates, which are meaningless. You've got this organization out there that's doing all sorts of manipulations to the economy. And when you get some sort of a tiff going on between the President of the United States and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve System, both very powerful roles, but I would allege the president, at least from the Democratic perspective, small d Democratic perspective, is probably more important to all of us, we the people. The point is you get this friction going on, and then it gets political. And then the Federal Reserve said, well, I'm not cutting the rates because I don't like Donald Trump. Well, that's not good policy. And of course, President Trump points that out. It might be time for a change. And there are other mechanisms and methods upon which to create a national currency. Like for the most part, if you think back to, crack open the Bible and you look at, render under Caesar that which is Caesar and render under God that which is God's. What Jesus was talking about is, look, Caesar makes the coins. This is the coin of the realm. We all use, in the Roman Empire, we all use, the coin of the realm. It's got Caesar's picture on it, it's his money. Well, it goes back even earlier than that. You can find ancient coins from Babylonia and places. Governments issued money for forever. And that's why one of the problems with the Roman Empire was when they started to dilute the value of their money by shaving it or mixing base metals into the silver and the gold to debase the currency. That's when the currency collapsed. But they didn't have a Federal Reserve or a central bank doing that. It was the government basically at mints and they stamp out money. So, well, that sounds kind of archaic. We certainly don't live in the times of the Babylonians or the Romans or the ancient Greeks. But no, we live in the modern United States of America and the American Treasury within my lifetime. And believe me, I'm not quite that old. But the point is, the Federal Treasury was issuing silver certificates where you could take a silver certificate to a federal bank and you could hand it in and they would give you silver coins and even gold certificates, but money was convertible because the Treasury was issuing money and the Federal Reserve was issuing money. Well, stuff happens, crises come, crises go. And today, our Federal Treasury does not issue currency. Not only issue some gold and silver coins, and there's some collectible stuff. But the reality is we don't have a competing monetary system. And I suggest maybe President Trump might want to think about that. We could come up with a Treasury-backed dollar based upon silver or gold or platinum or whatever, sand on the beach, doesn't really matter, and compete with the Federal Reserve because not only do they have the lender of last resort duties, but they also have this monetary policy under their dual mandate, which means they and they alone can fiddle with the economy. Now, you probably don't want an elected government that is $37 trillion in debt, spendthrifts beyond compare, incapable of balancing a budget or managing a government, basically doing monetary policy. That would probably be bad. But what we could have is an alternative currency issued by the federal government that would be a check and a balance on the Federal Reserve notes, which, as the president of the Federal Reserve Bank in Minnesota pointed out, we can print these to infinity. And he's not kidding. You really, really can. And that's what the Federal Reserve does when it goes into the bond market, buys the bonds, put new money in. It's all digital. They don't print it up anymore. The point is thinking about alternatives, because at some point the system really becomes dysfunctional, and we're getting close to that. At 37 trillion in debt, you got 20%-ish of all tax revenues are going to pay interest on the debt that you spent the money years and years ago. Nobody can remember where it went. At some point, that system becomes untenable. And we can see that in the economic numbers today. I mean, if you look at the real estate market, it is not a happy place. We've got 70% of Americans can no longer afford to buy a home. That's 95 million households can't afford to buy a house. And when you look at new home sales in May, they're down 14% month over month, 6% year over year. What it tells you is that the economy for the average person is deteriorating while the federal government is like Nero playing the violin while Rome burns. And it's kind of the same thing where Paul's playing the violin while the federal budget is burned to the ground. And this is a real problem. I think this is where President Trump is right. And this is a perfect opportunity to change the paradigm and bring in the system. And I think that's something that the administration should be looking at. If you can't control the Fed, let's figure out a way to get around the Fed. And do we need a Fed? No, you don't. The Treasury can issue money, just like Caesar issued money. Render unto Donald that which is Donald's. Anyway, I'm out of time for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's always a privilege and a pleasure. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Bye.